them both to close out the day.
Thanks, Vincent. I appreciate it.
Hello.
Hi, Guy.
Hello.
Take it away.
Thank you. So we get to have a bit of a conversation both about your work, book, some lessons for, an audience we have of these are entrepreneurs, but they're also internal entrepreneurs. These are folks inside growing company culture and the like. But I want to start a little bit with your work. What I like best, I heard you describe your podcast, How I Built This, as not a business podcast, but a storytelling podcast through the lens of business. And maybe set us up both with your work and the book. Tell us why story is the medium.
Yeah. I discovered, I took a class at a business school 12 years ago, just on a whim. I didn't go to business school. And I expected it to be full of abstract ideas and theories. And it was actually told through stories. The first day we received a case study, which was the story of Howard Schultz and Starbucks. And I was blown away. I didn't realize that business schools were taught that way. And what I started to, as the class progressed and we started to read more and more of these case studies of founders and the businesses they founded and the challenges they went through and the crises they faced, it occurred to me that there were similar, there are parallels with the hero's journey, what Joseph Campbell codified in the 50s and 60s, this idea that, all great epics follow a similar narrative arc. And I started to see that in the stories of founders and businesses. That idea was planted in my mind and it kind of stayed there. And about 7 years later, I decided to start working on the show, How I Built This. I am a longtime broadcaster and podcaster and I've created a bunch of shows. And this was a side project of mine that I started in 2015. And in 2016, we launched How I Built This. And it is a narrative journey into the lives and the stories of some of the most iconic brands and products in the world. And now it's not just a podcast, it's a conference, it's live events, and now it's a book.
It's a book. And congrats on that, by the
Thank
way.
you.
That's no small feat, a big part of your journey. I both listener and in the book, a common theme are these moments. And I've spent 12 years myself talking to entrepreneurs about these moments. And something that always stands out to me is the moment that become great stories years later look a lot like the moments when someone should rationally just step away.
Yes.
And I wonder if you have developed any wisdom about characterizing when a moment is rationally time to walk away from something, as opposed to just one mountain will describe a year later when I'm interviewed by Guy Raz on How I Built This.
I just actually this morning interviewed Jeremy Stoppelman of Yelp. He's been on the show before, but he came back on. We do a check-in series called the Resilience Series, and it's really designed for this moment. I started this series back in March when the pandemic hit, and it's designed to kind of show people that companies like Yelp and Lyft and Airbnb are struggling right now and are trying to figure out how to stay afloat. And it's designed to also to give people watching reassurance that they're not alone. Mm-hmm. And, when Jeremy Stoppelman founded Yelp, in the first sort of 4 months of that business, nobody showed up. I mean, they were getting zero traffic. They were getting no traction at all. It really, by month 6, he was very concerned that maybe this thing really wasn't going to work. But of course, they stuck with it, and Yelp is a billion-dollar business today. So the answer to the question is, it's not always clear. It's often intuitive. But the question that you have to ask yourself is, when I set out to solve a problem, which is basically the foundation of a business, right? There's a problem in the world, and I see that problem, and I am going to solve that problem with a product or a service that improves on that problem and hopefully solves it. So the question is the problem you're trying to solve one that only you have and maybe a tiny number of people have? Or is it a problem that you're solving that you have and that maybe more people have and that maybe more people begin to realize they have, right? Because think about the iPhone. Nobody had this problem, right? Nobody had the problem of not having an iPhone. We didn't know what it was. But what Steve Jobs was able to do with so many of the products he created and put out into the world was to basically say to you, you don't really know what you want. You don't know what you need, but I do. And I know the problems you have, and I'm going to solve them for you. And that was what made him such an effective marketer and campaigner. The question is, if after a year of grinding away, it becomes clear that the problem that you're trying to solve is not a problem that anyone else has or anyone really is ever going to think they have, then it might be time to kind of shift focus, pivot, or try something different. But it's a very personal decision, right? I mean, right now we're in the middle of a very challenging economic time. And so many people are faced with really difficult choices, in terms of keeping their businesses alive. And these are the moments where, you have to kind of assess all you have worked towards and the value of what you're doing and how much you believe that the world needs this product or service that you're putting out. And if you really fundamentally believe that the world needs it, then it's not time to quit. It's not time to stop.
Yeah. I had a founder once describe it to me that even if she thought there was more life left in the product, she didn't want to give it that. And meaning you also have to see your own journey. Like if you hate what you're doing now, it's time.
Yeah.
I think a lot about that we forget that it's not one version of the story. It's your journey. And so for someone else, it might be a time to move on, but for others, it's time to push on. Is that something you're finding? Like there's a different kind of experience for each founder you must talk to?
It's different for every single founder. There are obviously similar experiences and similar attributes and traits, which we can talk about later, but it's every story is different. Every journey is different, right? And that's self-evident. What I think what matters is what your connection to this product or service is, and as I say, this unshakable view that the world needs it. I'll give you an example. Tristan Walker, who created a brand called Bevel. It's a double-edged single blade razor. He's a black man who all his life struggled with shaving, because like many black men, like many men with very tight curls in their hair, because what happens is when you shave and use a Gillette 5-blade razor, it shaves under your skin and your hair grows back into your skin and it creates scars and painful razor bumps. And Tristan didn't feel like there were any products that were designed for him and for people like him, his friends who were young, who had iPhones, who, all of the razors that were designed to prevent razor bumps were like found in the dusty, ethnic aisle. And he felt like this was a problem that he could solve. And the way he wanted to solve it was to produce not only a great razor, but a beautiful razor, a razor that had the similar unboxing experience as an iPhone. In fact, he was inspired by that whoosh sound of the iPhone. And he wanted to create a razor for him and for people like him who had the same problem, but that was beautifully designed and packaged and sat right next to the Gillette razors and the other razors and was an excellent product. Well, he had a hard time finding funding. He had a hard time scaling that product because there were lots of people who just didn't see the market for it, who said to him time and again, I don't see who's going to buy this. But he knew who was going to buy it, because he knew that he had this problem and that millions of other men and women had this problem. And he knew that if he couldn't solve it, then nobody could. That if he couldn't actually convince people that this was a problem, nobody could. And so despite the setbacks and despite the pushback and despite the getting close to insolvency, he pushed forward. He kept moving forward. And today it's now a subsidiary of Procter & Gamble and a very successful product and available in every, Target and Walmart and Walgreens and so on. But that unshakable view and belief that if the world needed this thing and he had to solve it, and if he couldn't, then nobody could. That's what fired up.
There's actually a couple threads in that story that are that are profound. I want to take, I think, the less interesting one first and come back to the broader one that I think you're making. Always start with the less interesting one, right? But I think an important one, this idea of like, Bevel story is interesting. It's now under Procter & Gamble. It's exactly where I was going to head. Because one thing that we had technically been reporting a whole lot about for years on is we're in generations long decline in rates of entrepreneurship. So despite the like, we have tons of, pop culture about entrepreneurship, and it's very good to be talking about economic dynamism, but we've kind of changed the likelihood of a company growing to go public. You're gonna much more likely to be acquired if you succeed at all. I wonder if you're seeing in your own interviewing this relationship between generating new companies that will come and stay, as opposed to the journey is to be acquired and serve. Is that relationship to what economic growth can look like? Is that something you're finding in your interviews?
I hope not. I mean, let me speak to the point you just made. It's a very important point. Entrepreneurship has been in decline in the United States since the 70s. So even though How I Built This is a very popular show and lots of people listen to it and want to become entrepreneurs, and by the way, entrepreneurship is what so many kids go to business school for today. They didn't even teach it in the 80s and in the 90s. And now, of course, these are oversubscribed classes. So how do you square that with the fact that there's been a decline in entrepreneurship, right? In the 70s, there were more Black-owned banks in America than there are today. In the 80s, there were more Black-owned insurance companies than there are today. There are a number of factors. Part of that is consolidation. But the biggest reason, in my view, is health insurance, okay? Americans look at Europe and they think, oh, Europe, that's the old world. There's, regulations and there's red tape. That's nonsense. There's a much stronger culture of entrepreneurship in Europe today than there is in the United States because they have universal health care. They don't have to worry about losing their health insurance. In the United States, we have employer-provided health insurance, so people are less willing to take risks. That's a huge problem. I've been saying this now for a long time. If you are pro-business and pro-entrepreneurship, you should actually be pro-universal healthcare. Because if you believe that entrepreneurship, and not just entrepreneurship, but risk-taking, even if you're working for a big company, creative thinking, right? If you believe in that, if you believe that those are the engines of innovation, then you should support that kind of thinking. You should support that kind of risk-taking. And so you're right that there's a different model today. I don't have a whole lot of experience with entrepreneurs who start out wanting to be acquired from day one.
Really,
I mean, part of that is I think How I Built This and what we kind of look for and what the show kind of represents. I think many of the founders that I've interviewed will say we are looking to create a 100-year brand, and that could be John Zimmer of Lyft or Jeremy Stoppelman of Yelp, or I'm talking about tech companies here, but it could be Stacey Madison of Stacey's Pita Chips. I mean, the company was acquired, but a lot of these, Gary Erickson of Cliff Bar, I mean, he sees his brand as a 100-year company. He still owns it. I think that there is a commitment in this country among many entrepreneurs to build something that endures, sustains, and lasts, and provides employment and a life for hundreds of people over time. But of course, the lure of being acquired or of going public is very much a real thing, and oftentimes influenced by the addition of investors in a business and so on. So, it's. I don't know if there's one clear pattern right now, but I do think that when it comes to entrepreneurship, we can do much better in this country, and we can actually use moments like this one, economic crises, to really begin to radically rethink entrepreneurship and think of ways to create more opportunities for people to build and grow, whether they're doing it outside on their own or within internally in a bigger organization.
You bring up the note. What is there, a recession or something happening this year? I hadn't heard. Yeah, pretty rough year. And though we have these really wonderful stories of exceptions, the Uber or the General Electric that came out of the fires of a recession. Normally recessions are super cruel to small or businesses that have not yet reached scale. We see corporations tend to net decrease during periods of recession. Are you worried about what we look like coming out of this recession and the state of entrepreneurship?
The answer is yes and no. So let me start with the yes. Am I worried for restaurants? Am I worried for travel and leisure businesses? Am I worried for people who depend on that? I mean, flight attendants, airline pilots. I mean, it's a rough time that we're facing. But here's what I would say about small businesses now who are fighting to stay alive. There are, and I don't mean to minimize this because there are some businesses that are really, really struggling, but I do think that it's moments like these when businesses have to really build resilience in every which way possible. And essentially, if you are a business that has seen your revenue decline dramatically, right? I mean, I just talked to Yelp this morning. They saw a 65% decline in their revenue in a matter of weeks because they're an ad-based business. They had a nuclear winter scenario that they were working on where they would, just to survive, they would have a skeletal staff running the company. I mean, they were really seriously talking about this in March. I think any business right now, in order to build resilience, and I'm sure many of them have already done this, especially if you're watching and you're working in one, you've got to plan for the worst case scenario in order to survive the worst case scenario and hope that you're actually not going to face that scenario. And oftentimes that's the case. And I've been seeing a lot of that in conversations I've been having. I've been seeing a lot of small businesses really think creatively about different ways and different models to generate new revenue streams. I mean, not just small businesses, but even bigger companies. I mean, I've been seeing some really creative thinking in, I interviewed, here's an example. I interviewed the founders of Luke's Lobster. Okay. It's a lobster roll shack. I think they've got a couple in Philadelphia. And most of their locations are shut down. And by the way, they have a lobster, they support lobster fishermen and fishermen in Maine. Well, 70% of seafood in the United States is consumed at restaurants and at casinos and on ships. So all of a sudden, there's a glut of lobster, a glut of bluefin tuna, a glut of all this stuff. They've turned their business. I mean, they still have some lobster shacks open selling sandwiches, but they've essentially overnight created a direct-to-consumer business where you can go on their site right now. I just did it. You can buy bluefin tuna from the Atlantic Ocean, because these fishermen are coming in with this incredible stuff, lobsters, and there's a glut of it. So they are trying to, support the lobster fishermen, but also support their own business. I just talked to the founder of Zumba, Alberto Perlman. They had this crazy situation, not crazy. I mean, imagine you're in the fitness industry. All these fitness centers are shut down. Their business model depends on fitness instructors who teach Zumba to pay them a license fee, right? So what do? Alberto Perlman goes to his team and he says, what are we going to do? Like, we have to come up with something quick. Is there a way for us to support our fitness instructors? Zumba came up with an online fitness video platform where their instructors could teach and have people pay them to join their classes. It's a program that they designed in 6 weeks, a platform that they stood up in 6 weeks that enables Zumba instructors to go on, teach Zumba classes. And by the way, Zumba is not taking a cut. All the cash is going to those fitness instructors. And in some cases, they're making more money because they're not sharing it with the fitness, with the gym. Now, is it working out 100% for everybody? No, but it's a really interesting model, and it's created a completely new way of doing business for Zumba. And what Alberto told me a couple weeks ago was, if you asked him to do this, if he asked his team to do this a year ago, it would have taken 2 years. There would have been meetings. There would have been a marketing plan. There would have been a whole rollout plan. There would have been lawyers involved. There would have been all kinds of nonsense. They did it in 6 weeks because they had to. They had no choice. And it wasn't perfect when it came out, but it was good enough. And it's gotten better every day. So the point of that story is to say that right now is a moment for small business, any business, to think radically about every possible thing you could do, not only to save your business, but to prepare you for when we come out of this moment so that you actually have an advantage because you have laid the groundwork for the next phase of your business.
I'm working on some overly complicated metaphor to the wildfires in the West Coast right now, because business reporting, we will so often look at recessions and say, as an economic principle, they're supposed to clear out the underbrush. Right. You do want economic underperforming companies to go. You do want people to change what industry they're in. That is sort of what happens. You don't naturally gravitate. Something devastating happens and you move. But there's also a degree of severity that we as a society still struggle with, right? Like we don't necessarily think that all restaurants should close, or we don't necessarily think that only Olive Garden should survive. And we're like wrestling with how much of that economic devastation is economically healthy and how much of it's overwrought. And that's something that I think also happens, and is a relationship between new and small business. That new business, high growth companies that have some degree of capitalization usually can pivot quickly. We're watching the loss of small business that we're never going to be really, grow really quickly. That seems, I think as a culture, we're not sure how we feel about that. And maybe that's some of the challenge we're having now.
Yeah. I mean, look, there's no way to sugarcoat it. It is a really, really challenging time. Look, I work with NPR, and NPR is facing an enormous budget deficit gap. Enormous. I mean, because NPR depends on a variety of things like sponsors. It depends on grants from foundations. It depends on listeners who voluntarily contribute. It receives less than 1% of its money from the federal government. So 99% of its money is coming from people, is coming from different sources of people. And the first thing to go in a crisis is a company's marketing budget. This is a very, very challenging time. And I think you're right that there are going to be have already been and will be businesses that don't survive or can't survive for a variety of reasons. I do think that moments like these do, what happens is they do, especially this, because we're not just in the middle of an economic crisis. We're in the middle of a global health crisis, right? So this one is particularly severe and unique. But let me throw out a silver lining here. And I if you're watching this and you are experiencing this, I don't want to minimize what you're going through in any way, but I do want to point out this simple idea, because there are a lot of reasons to feel despair right now. And it's not just the pandemic and the economy, it's also our political crisis in this country. But here's where I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic about the changes that will come as a result of the crisis that we're in right now. I really believe that the smartest minds in America, the people watching this, the people who are in the tech sector or who are in the business sector or who are just fonts of ideas, they are going to have to harness their intellectual energy on world-changing, solving world-changing problems. It's not just about how do I come up with a better cannabis delivery system faster. It's not just about how do I build a better productivity software. Okay, that's fine. I'm not disparaging that. That's fine. Make your cannabis delivery system faster, make your productivity software, but you're really smart. Can you do something? Can you think of an idea that is even bigger? I think of Pat Brown. Pat Brown is the founder of Impossible Foods. Pat Brown is a biochemist who was a tenured professor at Stanford. He was on the fast track to winning the Nobel Prize. He did pioneering research in cervical cancer and HIV. He left Stanford because he wanted to solve a big problem, which is climate change. And he knew that 15% of global climate emissions come from the production of livestock. for food. It's clearing forests, it's methane, it's all kinds of things. Now, and by the way, I really try not to eat meat. I'm not going after people for eating meat, but meat consumption is a huge, terrible problem. Okay. He leaves Stanford to figure out, because he knows he's got the knowledge as a biochemist. He knows that in theory, you can produce meat from plants, that you can engineer meat from the nodule in a soy plant, in the root of a soy plant called the leg hemoglobin. And what does he produce after 5 years? The Impossible Burger. Now, if you haven't had it, it's an amazing burger. If you go to Burger King and try the Impossible Burger, it's pretty damn good. And he believes he's going to be able to make steaks and chops and all those other things. Now, that's a moonshot. That's the kind of big swing thinking that I'd like to see more of. And I really believe that moments like these of crisis will force that kind of big thinking, will inspire that kind of big thinking. Think about the wildfires in California and the massive hurricanes we've had this year. This is a moment for huge radical thinking. And so I believe we have no choice but to hope and to believe that this is a moment that will inspire that. I mean, it has to. It absolutely has to. And I hope in 5 years I'm talking to those people on how I built this.
Well, so let's turn to some of those with some time we have. Actually, I alluded to a more interesting thread from your Bevel line. So among, I saw in the chat, the many crises of 2020, no kidding. Among them is consequential, meaningful, and God willing, productive reckoning with racial inequality and centuries of oppression. And the black wealth gap, the black household wealth gap is an enormous one. Entrepreneurship is a vehicle to attack that. It's not the only vehicle. I think I've seen lots of really good reporting about there's a right generational leap, and for some folks, getting the W-2 job with a solid salary is the exact right pathway for changing generational wealth. But moonshot is often sometimes through entrepreneurship. I wonder if you're seeing bright lights through your hundreds of interviews in entrepreneurship as a vehicle for addressing black wealth gap. Is that anything that's coming up in some of your reporting?
Yeah, I mean, listen, this is a marathon of a challenge, right? This is a challenge that will not be solved overnight, and can't just be solved through entrepreneurship. I'm not one of these people that believes that business has the answers to everything, because it's nonsense. Business doesn't have the answers to everything, and business can't. By the way, the government, the federal government, us, we with our tax dollars have the ability to scale massive change, and so in order to address things like systemic racism, you have to start with policy and legislation and fundamental changes to the law. That is the first and most important step, because otherwise you're essentially saying to the population, hey, you guys figure it out, and you guys can, let the markets figure it out. And I don't believe that's ever going to solve anything. I mean, look where we are today, right? Here's what I will say. There is, and if you listen to how I built this, you will hear examples of it. There is a growing and really inspiring movement of Black entrepreneurs in the tech world, in the consumer packaged goods world, in every sector, right? I mean, from Topa Watana, who founded Calendly, to Tristan Walker, who founded Bevel, it goes on and on and on. The McBride sisters, who have the largest Black-owned winery in the United States, are going to be on the show in a couple of weeks. To Nancy Twine of Briogeo, who founded her own hair care products. I mean, as I say, you can go on and on and on. So there are growing examples of this. What I would say is that overall, we know that a very tiny amount of the venture money goes to Black entrepreneurs. A small amount goes to women entrepreneurs. It's growing in both of those areas, but at a very slow pace. The role that I play in all of this is very small, but here's how I see my job. Here's how I see what I do. Over the course of 4 years on how I built this, about 50% of every single one of our episodes has featured a woman or a person of color. We don't do that to be like righteous or to get patted on the back. We do that because we actually are a show that is in trying to inspire people to go out into the world and build ideas. And so our world as and we're consumers. As consumers, we are much worse off if every business and product and service is being produced by white men or white and Asian men only, because we're going to be limited in the choices we're given. We have to have a consumer environment that is diverse because it's better for everybody. So one of the things that I try to do on the show is to really highlight, diverse entrepreneurs, because I want listeners, I want somebody who's, let's say there's a 17-year-old, Latino kid or young Black woman listening. Just happened with Nancy Twine. I got a message from somebody who heard it, and she said, I heard myself in her story. I heard that I could do that too. So if we can do that in a small way, I'm not saying, we're just one show out of a million podcasts out there, but we really take that seriously because we know that people come to us for inspiration. And if there's a 20-year-old or even a 40-year-old listening to our show and can hear themselves in a person I'm talking to and can feel empowered to go and do that themselves, then I'm done. I can retire. I can leave. I've done my job.
You're hitting at something that definitely resonates with me. The idea of media is representation, and we particularly in the journalism side has always had probably a more overwrought relationship with that than we care to admit. Just how literal to population should we be versus a touch beyond what the moment is to point to where the future can be. And I think you're kind of hitting on that of like, you can't say, well, 2% of venture-backed companies are Black owned, so strictly 2% of our interviews should be that. That's illogical. You're fulfilling the prophecy. Yeah. You're building.
Yeah, it's the same with Fortune 500. I mean, you can't say that, we're only going to interview 3, Black CEOs because there are only 3 Fortune 500. I mean, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you actually show brown and Black faces, or in our case, voices on the air, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You will have more Black and brown entrepreneurs. And so we all have an enormous role to play in that. But as I say, it's not just we, the citizens. It's also, in order to really address these big questions of opportunity and how our society is structured and who it supports and who it benefits and who it doesn't, you have to have laws. We have to have really serious legislative shifts, which can have an enormous impact.
I want to turn to a couple of the threads and get a couple stories from your book before we head out. But something that we at Technical.ly report a bunch about is, of course, no company stops with the founder. Sometimes we love to fetishize that story, the origin myth, but it's so often about those early employees. Employee 5, employee 10, employee 100 are an important story, and I think that often gets lost. We only want to think about that. Employee 2 made a hell of a risk too. How much does that come up in any of your interviewing, or is that a theme that you bump into much?
Yeah, the inherent flaw in how I built this is the title of the show, because there's not a single brand or business in history that's built by one person. It's never happened. I mean, I created how I built this, but I created with an amazing group of people who I'd love and trust and would walk through a plate glass window for. So the reality is, of course, every story is about multiple people. One of the reasons why the show is structured the way it is, and by the way, inherent in the structure of the show is a flaw. It's an oral history. Anybody who studies oral history knows it's very valuable. It's an important part of history, but without documents, it's less accurate, right? Because our memories are less reliable than documentation. That being said, we do a lot of research ahead of time. I mean, if you hear the show or you read the book, you will know that I take this really seriously. I read hours and hours and hours, sometimes 10, 15 hours before every interview, because I have to know the story, ideally better than the person I'm interviewing knows their own story. because I want to make sure that they're not spinning things and that they are being accurate. So the answer to that question is yes, of course. Founders and co-founders and other people come up. Sometimes not enough. Sometimes occasionally not enough. But we really do try and focus on the holistic story and all of the people who were involved in, as you say, taking that risk. Because you're right, being number 2 or number 3 or number 5, that's a huge risk, especially if you're a software engineer and you're agreeing to take no money and a big chunk of equity versus a huge salary at Google, right? I mean, the equity could be worth $0 after 5 years. So it is a huge risk.
You alluded to a moment ago. Investment VC, a subcategory of private equity, and how it perpetuates or could perhaps change the systems and businesses we have. There's a network effect to the kind of white male entrepreneur, white male investment class we have, and how that changes. We technically have a podcast called Off the Sidelines. It's about an investor education podcast, and we have an episode that comes up that you're making me think about that's on what entrepreneurs can teach investors. Because though rates of entrepreneurship among Black and brown people, among women, is also disproportionately low, there are more Black and brown and female founders than there are in particularly VC. And so we're trying to also think about, despite the power dynamics, what entrepreneurs should be teaching investors or how they should be changing thinking. And so maybe an off-the-wall question, but I'm wondering how much you think about what entrepreneurs have to teach investors, because so often we think of the opposite framing.
A lot. I think VCs love to see themselves as the heroes of their own stories more than anyone else. If you are a successful VC, you're failing 99 times out of 100. You're putting every single chip on the roulette table is covered. You're putting a chip on every single number on the roulette table, every color. You are going to win. And the problem with VC is, look, I know lots of them. There's some terrific people, and some of them are friends of mine. Some of my best friends are VCs. But here's the thing, okay? The idea that VCs are the engines of innovation, or that, I don't buy that. I mean, ultimately, if you are in the VC world, it's a closed world. You've got a pot of gold from other really rich people, and you're taking that pot of gold and you're making bets, but taking big chunks of equity. And because you've done the math, that even if 9 of these lose, one of these is going to be big. And then all of your rich friends who gave you the money are even richer. And it actually perpetuates the problems that we have in this country of income inequality. That's why I like Vanguard. Anybody can go to Vanguard and give them $100 for a low fee, invest in a low fee fund, and Vanguard's available to anyone. You can't just walk into Andreessen Horowitz and give them $100 and say, "Hey, can I have a piece of the action too?" Do you know what I mean? So I'm sorry I named them, but I just thought of them.
They're one of the world's largest
great company.
Index funds. Yeah,
it's great. But you know what I mean? It's so, to me, like there really is a disconnect. The other thing is that a VC is their job is to evaluate a business that is going to get them a 10x return in a very short period of time, right? And it's not always clear or evident. And by the way, that might not always be the best criteria. I mean, is Bevel, if you're looking at a product like Bevel, does it matter if you get a 10x return on that, or does it matter if it has a huge cultural impact? That's actually the measure of what makes that brand valuable, right? So I would say, could there be a world where we actually create a new model where there isn't, there is more sort of a grant-based system? I mean, look at a brand like what's the name? That company that makes Battle Royale and Clash Royale, those mobile games. I can't remember what they're called. It's somebody in the chat knows. It's a big video gaming company out of Finland. They got a grant from the Finnish government to launch. No strings attached. The Finnish government wasn't like, "Oh yeah, where's my 20%?" Like, I love that idea. I love that model. And there's some of that happens in the U.S. too. There are, I think in the city of Buffalo, I interviewed these guys who started a company called, I'm blanking on the name, but it's this is an African American launched venture. It's a haircutting business, and these guys, you can sign up through an app and book a haircut, and they got a grant from the city of Buffalo, and the only stipulation was you got to open up an office in Buffalo, and you got to hire people in Buffalo, but that's it. We don't have equity. I love that model. So to me, it's not about what can people starting a business teach entrepreneurs and VC. It's how can we think of new models to fund businesses? How can we get foundations to if you really are serious about building equity and really helping create more Black and brown entrepreneurs, you're better off building a fund that can give out grants and can just seed businesses, no strings attached, with guidance, of course, and with help and with resources, but without the pressure of where's my 10x return in 2 years.
And that's obviously complicated. I think folks, Supercell called out. Thank
Supercell.
you, Nick and Dave.
Yep.
Gary
Squire,
Johnson.
yeah, Squire. Gary, thank you. That's Squire is the name of the haircutting company. Awesome company.
Right. Look at that. See, the people are doing it. Thank you. The people are doing it.
I love it. Yeah.
Oh, I lost that thread there. But yeah. So lessons from entrepreneurs to investors. The theme there. I may have lost your own thread. Like, what is that lesson that?
Yeah.
Just that you're not the only. You're not the only. You're not the one. I guess that the risk is as much as I mean, I once teased an investor that VC are just bankers with more Twitter followers, and they because you're right. There's definitely that sense of I was early in or I did this, which is true, but at the end of the day, as you're alluding to, like it ain't often your skin is really online, which is a complicated opinion. I'm probably saying
no. And by the way, if you're a successful VC, you're getting exposure to the best opportunities before anybody else, right? So it's really, look, and again, a lot of startup founders need the VC cash. They go that direction. They go that route. A lot of people I've had on the show went to family foundations and took a different route, which served them in a much better way because family foundations have a much longer time horizon. They're not looking for 10x return in 10 years. They're looking to invest for 50 years if need be. So I think that the story isn't what founders can teach VC, but it's more about how the VC community can alter how it evaluates what it wants to support.
Right, and if it does, I mean, I remember a pretty challenging interview once. We were doing a reporting on social entrepreneurship, and I had an investor, a savvy one, someone who I thought was quite smart, who was so eye rolling at any sense of social enterprise or social entrepreneurship.
Fine,
because his point was jobs. That is
Fine.
the only social.
That's right. And Milton Friedman said the only point of a corporation is to produce profit, and people believed that for 50 years. And now we're reevaluating that. So maybe we'll reevaluate that in the future as well. I hope we do.
Well, let's do one question on that, and then I know we got. I think we have like 5-10 minutes left with you, and we'll go to some book questions, and because many of these folks here have your book now, so we got to make sure they know what they're excited about. But actually, yeah, you said Milton Friedman, so you have to duck sometimes in this moment when you say Milton Friedman. But maybe worth noting, last year we had the Business Roundtable, 150 or more of the most influential CEOs signing a pledge that go beyond shareholder value. We're now like in that year mark. So there's a lot of great reporting happening about how much that really moved or happened. It's timed also with a generational shift of employees expecting something different from their employers.
Yeah.
What you have to take a stand on. I wonder if you think that's fad or generational change, or are we expecting more from our companies, and will that last, or does this just sound like we're telling ourselves a nice story?
Yeah, it's a question I've been asking a lot of founders. I actually think it's a really interesting question because you are seeing a shift. I mean, you're seeing, look at PayPal. PayPal has no problem deplatforming racists and Nazis, and I mean, as they shouldn't, okay? They have no problem with it. They have no problem making it impossible to transact business if you if you traffic in hate. Okay. That's great. That's really important. I think businesses that take a stand on, a whole variety of issues, immigration and Black lives. And I mean, I think we're coming to a point today where consumers are going to demand it, as they should be, because you know what? We've been hearing as consumers for the last 40 years, let the markets decide. Hey, let the market figure this out. Let the market. Okay. Well, if the market is saying, I'm not going to buy your product because you're a jerk company, well, you may have to fix the way you operate. So I think that increasingly companies are going to have to take stands, and it means that they're going to lose some customers, but they're going to gain others. Is that a good thing or bad thing? I can't say, but I think it's where we are. And I think, a whole charged generation of younger people is leading this. And I'd be lying if I didn't tell you I wasn't inspired by it, because I am.
Yeah. Yeah. The idea that, not making a stance is making a stance. And I think we had a whole lot of corporates and companies that wanted to say, we're not touching that, but now we're having a reckoning that is in itself, you are now making, if you are made uncomfortable with the incredibly simple sentence Black Lives Matter, then that is a stance. You've made a stance if that makes you uncomfortable as a person or organization. So that's inspiring to you. You feel like that's not, from climate change to, we're seeing like a full range of companies making kinds of stances on crucial issues. That doesn't sound as, that's something deeper than just PR for you.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't answer that. But
you look into the soul of CEOs so often. You can't.
I don't know. I mean, I think there are some like PayPal where it's real, where the CEO is really committed. And I think there are definitely examples where the leadership is really committed. At NPR, the leader there, John Lansing, he is really committed. Like, he's legit. I really believe him when he talks about his commitment to racial justice. So I don't know. I can't speak for every company, corporation, but what I can say is that I think that the employees in many of these organizations are demanding it and are expecting it, and that's probably ultimately what's going to matter.
Let's get a couple questions in on
Sure.
on your book before we lose you. I don't have my pretty copy yet, so I can't do the thing of putting it up. Yeah, can you do that?
And I will say, if you haven't bought it and you do like how I built this, your purchase of this book supports us. Our show is free. Every single episode's free. So if I would have asked you to pay 10 cents for every episode of How I Built This, you could have got how much this book costs. It's less than 3 cups of Starbucks coffee. So please buy one for you and your friends and give them as gifts, because it supports us and we need your support. Okay, that's my pitch.
If anyone doubted this guy was a public media guy, we nailed it. Well, many folks up here already bought the book, so you're getting it, and you're getting a signed copy. Guy, just give it. How do we know it's not a fake sign? Is there a trick here in your signature?
I'm actually literally in my office here, in my studio here, signing thousands of these. But you guys will have I think you guys have ones that are the pages are signed. I signed 16,000 of them. If I find on my phone,
you don't have a stamp. This isn't fake.
I wish I had a stamp. God, I would have done that. I didn't have the foresight to think of a stamp. That would have been easier. No, I've gone through so many damn Sharpies. I mean, they're all dead. These Sharpies are all dead.
Done. All right. So we've confirmed this is real. All right. Let's get a couple book and podcast questions in. Yeah. People are amazed by the 16,000.
16,000, Dave. 16,000, my friend.
Does that over what? What is that? What is that like?
Took me I would say sort of 4 weeks. It was a lot. It was intense. It's a lot. And I had to do other things. I still do my show. I still do other things. I still, do things like this. So it was busy time. My hand is barely working.
When I'm writing my wife like a Post-it note, like trash went out. I'm like, oh, so many letters in this. But this is serious that you're doing a lot of it. So there is a huge ocean of business books, and despite a lot of the shade, there's like a good punchline for a lot of business books. I actually think a lot of them are fairly good, because they tend to be, I know it's a hot take, I think a lot of them are usually built for relative action. I think that many of them do have some crystal of here's something you can take. Yours, you come from a very different background, right? You're not a Harvard case study writer. You're not, you're coming from a storytelling aspect. But
Yep.
I've heard you speak, and I've had the experience that you still think this is a book that folks can take some action from.
That's what it's designed for. It's designed with. It's a series of narratives, so you can read it at different levels, like a Pixar film. You can just read it for fun stories, but in every single chapter and every single story, I've profiled more than 80, I think almost 100 different businesses, some of which were on the show, some of which were not, and it's not the same as the show, but excuse me, every single chapter is designed to leave you with very clear, practical, actionable advice and wisdom, because we learn from the mistakes, the failures, and also the triumphs and the good decisions made by others. So, I mean, I'm really trying to, to dig into things like how do you market a product? How do you build buzz for a product? How do you come up with an idea? But you're right. I mean, there are lots of business books that are total nonsense. Actually, one of my favorite business books is one of the OG business books, which is Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I always remember the most important thing from that book is when somebody says something to you and they're wrong, they've like exaggerated or made a mistake, just don't correct them. Just let it go. And I think about that all the time. It's so true. Every time I'm like, yeah, I think, blah, blah, blah. It's like $40. And someone's like, actually, it was $42.30. I'm just thinking, God, you got to read Dale Carnegie's book, man.
Yeah, you're no good.
But a lot of business books are theoretical, abstract. This is narrative driven because we learn from stories. So the book is structured as here's how you can start a business from soup to nuts, but it's also designed as here's how you can introduce an idea out into the world, or here you might be in the middle of the thick of things. Here's a chapter to help show you how Howard Schultz dealt with it, or Sarah Blakely dealt with it, or any of the other entrepreneurs I've interviewed have dealt with it. So, it's designed to be kind of a comprehensive compendium of wisdom, advice, but also, as I say in the book, there are no shortcuts to starting a business or introducing an idea out into the world or a disruptive concept inside your own company. The only shortcut is to learn from the people who made mistakes before you, so you know how to avoid them.
Yeah, that's well said. And there are questions that I've done a rotten job of hitting all of them, but one stood out to me that I did like. Someone asked that, I'm sure you get this question a lot, but they want to know what was your favorite interview, might be from the book or otherwise. I will add, I want to know what's the worst one. Can you shit talk on someone? Can you?
I don't know if I can do that. I'll tell you, favorite one's really hard, right? And it's not a cop-out.
You're quite the diplomat,
It's not a cop-out. Remember, I interview, when I interview somebody, I am interviewing them for 3 hours minimum, sometimes for occasionally 2 sessions, okay? Now, if you are talking to somebody about their life in such granular detail, in an intimate setting for 4 hours, maybe longer, you naturally develop an empathy for them. You learn their flaws. You learn about why they made decisions. You learn, you're inside their head. You're inside their consciousness. So in a sense, I fall in love. I mean, I'm speaking metaphorically here, but there's a form of love that I fall in with everybody I interview. There's some stories that really do stand out. I mean, and look, there's some entrepreneurs that just inspire me so much. Sal Khan is, Khan Academy has changed our culture. That thing educates 20 million humans a month, and it's free. And he had 3 degrees from MIT at the age of 22. Computer science, biology, and a master's in computer science. He's a certified genius. He was recruited by every hedge fund to go work on their quants or whatever. And he pushed all that aside to start a nonprofit. He's not a rich guy. He's doing fine, but he's so committed to this idea of offering a world-class education to anybody who has an internet connection for free. I'm inspired by people like Sal Khan, and Pat Brown, who I mentioned earlier. So, look, I keep in touch with a lot of people who've been on the show. I admire them so much. I love their stories. So it's hard to pick one, but So I'm sorry, I can't answer that.
We'll accept it. We're about to lose you. So I think the right question always for a journalist who does long form interviews is inevitably, you've done 100 of these, I'm sure, in the last just couple weeks alone. What's a question that you still haven't been asked that you wish you had been or you should have been?
By an interviewer?
Well, I mean, yeah,
Or
or anyone. I don't know. I guess everyone would be an interviewer, I suppose.
That,
So, yeah.
that I have not been asked?
Yeah.
I feel like I've been asked. I feel like I've been
Everything.
examined like by aliens,
Right.
you know, like those stories
Right.
that aliens poke and prod at you. Because I've been interviewed. It's so weird to be interviewed because I don't think I'm that interesting. People want to know all these details of my life. I'm happy to share it. Like,
what's your most painful childhood memory?
I'm happy to tell you what antidepressants I took. I can tell you anything you want to know. I can tell you I'm an open book. So there really isn't, there isn't anything I can think of. But look, I am an avatar for the people who come to the show. I am just like them. I am flawed. My North Star is kindness. I try to follow that. There are days where I've got road rage like everybody else. I have two, my most important job in my life is being a dad. I've got 2 kids. And if I had to give everything up, that's fine because I'm a dad. And that's all that ultimately matters. So I love doing what I do. I love telling stories that inspire people. We're living in a really difficult moment now. This is a time of great challenge and despair. And if how I built this can be a moment for somebody to feel like there's a shot in their arm, like, okay, the world is falling apart and there's climate change is here and our politics are so distressing, but this interview with this person really charged me up today. That's why I do what I do. That's why I'm here.
The man knows good radio. Let's leave it at that. That seems a great way to close out our conversation. Guy, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate everyone for being here for Introduce, Technical.ly's annual conference. We'll be sure to follow up with takeaways and lessons. I hope you had a wonderful day. And Guy, those of you getting Guy's book, it'll be ending up in the mail, I think in the next week to 2 weeks. I think I might be lying. 10 days. You'll be getting it signed. And Guy's telling us not a lie. He really signed it.
I really signed it. And I went through 100 Sharpies, not 4. I went through a lot, maybe more. Yeah.
That's incredible. That's the way to go. All right, Guy, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. All right.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
See you, everybody. Great conference. Thank you.